The US says it is entering the end game in its war against Iran. Washington is set to unveil a new sanctions package, calling it an economic D-Day. But Iran has dismissed the threat, saying it is like watching the same movie over and over again. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi says the bullying under US President Donald Trump is no different from that under previous US administrations. Remember, Iran has lived under US sanctions for decades. The new sanctions are expected to not just hit Iranian companies, but also affect foreign banks, businesses, airports, government entities, ship registries, and financial networks that provide Tehran with what Trump calls a lifeline. The targets include oil smuggling, cash transfers, exchange houses, swap lines, and front companies. But Iran is not starting from zero. Years of US sanctions have already forced Tehran to build an alternative trading system, one that relies heavily on China, on its neighboring countries, intermediaries, and the so-called shadow fleets. Earlier, US House Speaker Mike Johnson said the war in Iran is set to enter a new phase in the near future. Johnson also said he expects partner nations to provide support during the next stage of the conflict. But Iran has already warned countries against joining the US campaign. Head of Iran's top security body has warned that the country will treat any other nation supporting US economic measures against Iran as a, quote, act of war. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is expected to announce these new measures. Ahead of his scheduled media briefing, Bessent called it the, quote, single largest financial offensive ever marshaled against any adversary. The aim, he said, is to cut off every economic lifeline sustaining the regime until Tehran stands alone. But developments across the region suggest that Iran is far from being completely isolated. Days after Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan signed the Mecca Agreement, reports suggest that Iran has received an invitation to join the new security alliance. Mehdi Rahimi, head of Iranian Parliament's Khane Melat news agency, told Al Mayadeen that the invitation is under review. Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir is also visiting Tehran, and the visit comes as part of ongoing efforts to strengthen peace and security in the region. Oman's foreign minister will travel to Iran on Tuesday as Tehran and Muscat seek to find a way to regulate the passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Iraq has proposed a unified security coordination council with Iran and Saudi Arabia, aimed at rebuilding trust between the regional rivals. Iraqi National Security Advisor Qasim al-Araji has told State TV that the initiative seeks to address what he called a crisis of confidence between Tehran and Riyadh. As diplomatic corridors remain active, the war appears to be putting growing strain on American forces and on Washington's ties with its allies. Seoul's Marine Corps says that US has cancelled a joint amphibious landing drill scheduled for next month with South Korea. The cancellation was blamed on constraints on the availability of US forces due to the Iran war. But it follows US President Donald Trump's surprise order to scale back a separate annual joint military exercise that ended last Friday. Trump had cited the cost of the exercise and Seoul's refusal to take part in the Iran war. All right, joining us now on the broadcast from Berlin is Dr. Volker Stanzel. He's the former German ambassador to China and a security analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on Point Counterpoint, sir. My first question to you is, do you think US is being able to isolate Iran economically in the way that it has threatened to do so now that it's announced this so-called economic D-Day sanctions which will be rolled out?
Thank you for having me. Even though the problem you want to discuss is hardly tractable, I find, it overwhelms us all, I think. And just some of the things you have mentioned in the report go to show that. I think as far as the US is concerned, it is hard put to really realize that economic D-Day that has been announced now also by the Speaker of the House. I think the US has a big problem domestically, the US government, I would say, because the war is everything but popular in the US population. It turns out it is enormously costly. I think more than 100 billion US dollars have been spent, and now the government wants as much the same again from the Congress. So this is not something that the people who suffer every day when they see the rising oil prices would like to support. So one front line that the US is fighting is the war with Iran. The other front line, however, is the domestic situation. And this, I think, is a great impediment to realizing what has been announced as a war to be ended.
Right, Dr. Stanzel, all of those points are taken into consideration, and also given the fact that historically US has been sanctioning Iran since 1979. But given the fact that it's announcing this and also asking its allies to join in, do you see that as something that American allies will be taking up Washington on as far as this offer is concerned? Because we saw an invitation like this by the American president a few months ago when he asked American allies to come together and help try to counter Iran as far as the Strait of Hormuz is concerned. We didn't see a lot of participation on that front. There was a lot of hesitation. But as far as economic sanctions are concerned, do you think allies would be more willing to do that, given that Iran has in the past also been weakened with these sanctions?
Well, using the word invitation is almost ironic, I find, given the situation as it is, but also given the past that you've just alluded to. I cannot see that allies of the US that have in the past opposed the war as such, not to speak of joining that war, would now join the United States in a war where all the conditions are hardly hard to be understood. What actually is the next step that the US is doing? Where is it going? And can promise that it will lead to something better than we have now. You see what is happening in Lebanon, between Israel and Lebanon, even against what the US wishes. And still this is going on. This is something that European states would go in. Also, by the way, not only European states, it's also NATO allies in general. And you have seen what the Prime Minister of Canada has said only a day ago about the relationship with the United States. You know the position that Turkey has, which is also a NATO ally of the US. So I'm very hard put to imagine allies of the United States joining it, particularly in this economic D-Day effort it is going to make.
Dr. Stanzel, what do you make of Iran's strategy in this entire new phase of, quote-unquote, new phase of this war that US has declared? Because we're looking at reports coming in which suggest that Iran has received proposals to discuss the Mecca Pact that was signed by Saudi, Turkey, and Pakistan. And there's also an Iraqi proposal of a unified security coordination council between Saudi and Iran to try and smoothen things over there. What do you make of Iran's strategy over here? Because they have in the past also mentioned that they're not surprised by what Trump keeps saying, and they are probably looking at riding out the upcoming midterm elections. So do you think that's kind of the right approach that Iran is taking as far as fighting back against these American economic attacks?
Well, the whole development with all the aspects that you've been mentioning is tremendously interesting, and I find it also fairly dynamic, something we have not been used to looking at Iran in the past months or so. But you see that on the one hand, Iran is in a difficult situation domestically as well. That is economic, of course. It is also because it has attacked other Arab states and has not made friends in the region. So it is fairly isolated. And it sees, I think it realizes that it has to get out of that situation of isolation. What it is doing now is, on the one hand, reaffirming its opposition to the US policy in the region. On the other hand, trying to come to terms in some way or other with countries of the region which it has attacked not that long ago. But you see the Saudi reaction is not that negative, nor is the Qatari reaction negative. Then you have the Turkish president who has made statements that also show that he is thinking about coming to some kind of terms with Iran, which of course would benefit Turkey enormously. And you see that China and Russia, which are major players here, as you've mentioned at the very beginning, even China and Russia are keeping silent because they see there's a new dynamic here, and Iran might find a way to come to a compromise with its Arab neighbors, which I think would give these countries greater reassurance in dealing with the United States in the future, because they will also be asked to join the war sooner or later, and they don't want that, obviously. But coming to some kind of terms with Iran would give them some sort of safety in that respect. So I think we have a new dynamic here, which goes very much to the advantage of Iran and very much to the disadvantage of the United States.
Right. All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Stanzel. Clearly, it is not just an economic war that the U.S. has proposed and is now planning to carry out. It's also about who remains the least isolated, with new kind of alliances now emerging in this entire aspect. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Volker Stanzel, former German ambassador to China, joining us from Berlin. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. And those were the developments and the insights that we heard Dr. Stanzel talk about with respect to what exactly is happening now that the U.S. has announced its economic D-Day, the new wave of sanctions that America says it will be leveraging now against Iran.